Yo, thank y'all so much for being here. As Anna and I have these conversations about what it means to grow older and become ourselves, we're glad to have you be a part of that. So, enjoy.
So since I was 13, I have been part of like a uh, a group of, it's like a national survey from the Department of Labor, and
University of Chicago.
yeah, through the University of Chicago, that surveyed and followed people. In my case, it was, I think I was 13. It was back in 97. And
I said you were much younger than that. I said you were like 4.
oh my gosh.
I didn't remember the details. I just know that they had been doing it for a long time. But from the age of 4, the same person is slightly more interesting.
Embellishment.
It wasn't embellishment because I couldn't remember the details.
Okay.
So it was an honest miscalculation.
Okay. Anyway, since I was 13, back in 97, I have been part of a group of people. I don't even know how large this group is, of people that are just surveyed and they are followed across the trajectory of their life, just following us as people, right? Like who we were as students at the time, the type of kids we were, our interests, a little bit of like academic aptitude, right? Things that we did, things that we didn't do, our family makeup, where we came from. And we would get, it would be like an hour interview every year. No matter where I was, no matter when, like I could count on those people always tracking me down to interview me.
That's so funny.
And at the time, I didn't know that this would be a forever thing. I thought it was really interesting when it first started. I got paid for my time, and I thought it was really cool that, in a certain sense, like someone took interest, or national, whatever, like someone took interest in me to like want to spend an hour with me to like learn about me and all of that stuff. And again, I got paid for it as a kid. Extra change was helpful. And as I grew up, they still kept coming back, right? Well into my teenage years, late teens, into marriage. And it was just so funny because as I got older, the questions changed with how my life changed, right? They asked more about now my family that I've created, right? Like what marriage looks like, kids when they came, where I live, do I rent, do I own, my education, work, all of that stuff. So it has been interesting along the way. Also getting to reflect on my life. I've actively been reflecting. Now it's every other year.
Documented reflection, actually.
I don't get to see what's documented, but I'm part of a larger study, I guess. So anyway, they always reach out via email. They try every form of communication to find me. But this fall, the first point of contact that I got was an email. And the email started by saying, "Dear Anna, as you approach middle age," and I remember opening that email and seeing that, and that is the only thing I remember from that email. And I think I was in so much shock. I don't even think I ever ended up reading the rest of the email because as you approach middle age, comma, and you could pay me $1 million and I wouldn't be able to tell you what the rest of that email said. I screenshotted it and like I highlighted in red and I sent it to you and I said like, "How dare they do me like this?" or something like that. I can't remember what I said. I was in so much shock because it was the first time someone addressed me as a middle-aged person. Now, if anyone's going to address me as a middle-aged person, it's these people because they've been with me for a very long time, which is fine. Statistically, or if we're going to be very practical, I suppose I am at middle age?
Early middle age. I've looked this up. We are early middle age, and then middle age, and then late middle age.
Well, she said as you approach,
that's right. That's
right?
right. Yeah,
So I'm approaching. Anyway, I was, if there was like a pie chart, I was, a large part of it was in shock, and like a sliver of it was offended. There was no good feelings about any of it.
Wow.
But
That's very
maybe like like a tiny sliver that you wouldn't be able to see would find it funny.
It's kind of like the Jim when he's talking
Yes,
about Michael Scott.
critical thinking.
Critical thinking is
I made it bigger so you could
so
see
you
it.
can see it.
Yeah, that tiny bit would be
Comical.
I think the term middle age, I imagine it exists, to like, put time to things and to, I don't know, to fabricate some sort of idea of timeline or whatever.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I think about, when I think about the term middle age, it puts like a timeline on me. I feel like is what it is, right?
Yeah,
like
yeah.
You are way past your beginning. You are at your middle, and now it's like downhill from here, and the end is in sight, right? Like if you think about a race or something. No, like if you think about that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So like you think about a race, and you're like halfway there. I'm almost at the end. Or like I'm halfway through this paper, I'm about to be done, or whatever the case is. Like putting it that way, I'm like, well, if you put it like that, I guess, which is why I imagine, the quote unquote midlife crisis comes, because now people are like, half of my life is behind me. What have I even done with it? Right? Whereas I think up until this point, I have viewed the span of my life as very, I don't know. Maybe it's just like linear, like the line, it just keeps going and going. I don't this line doesn't have like a middle point and an end point. I'm just, because I'm a very present person, I'm just in the now. So, we talk about turning 40 next year. And I feel like you and I don't know, I think we could talk about this, but you and I have very different thoughts as far as like turning 40 is like this really big thing for you, maybe like a milestone or whatever the case is, which is fine. Where I'm like, okay, I am no longer a 30-something, but that's it. I think
that's as far as you're thinking about it.
Yeah, that's as far as I think about it. I don't necessarily think about put so much weight into it, because I'm just very much like, it's today. It's today, right? Like, 40 will get there when we get there. But because I feel like if I were to stop and think about, I'm at the middle of my life, sure, it might light a fire up in me to feel like, oh my gosh, what am I doing with every day of the rest of my life? Because it could do that for people. But what I don't want it to do is make me feel like give me a despairing type of perspective, where it's like, what have I done? What can I possibly do with this time?
Well, that kind of, I have a lot of questions about this research thing. Questions that I've asked, but even as you retell that story, I'm like, I've got more questions. But maybe it was shocking. If you think about the pie chart that you said, right? It's like mostly shock, and then offensive, and then this little sliver comical.
Mm-hmm.
I'm assuming it was shocking because you're like we say of most things in life, like, oh wow, that got here quick. Bless you. You got another one? Okay. Bless you.
Thanks.
Like most things in life, they kind of come quick, and you're like, whoa, I'm shocked.
Yeah.
Right? Unless there's more to the shock.
Yeah, it was just kind of like someone said something that I wasn't even thinking.
Someone said it.
Yeah,
Okay.
like someone said something that I was just like, oh, I wasn't thinking about myself this way. It's just like someone tells you, yo, you've got this huge thing on your face. And you're like, oh my gosh, what?
Right. What was offensive? Why was it offensive?
I felt like somebody was calling me old.
That's offensive, to be old? Like it's a bad thing? I know it's not. I know you don't think
no,
it is,
yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe for me, I guess
Yeah.
it's just like, yeah, I don't know.
but yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, turning 40 does feel, I turned 40 first and you turn 40 later in the year. Yeah. I mean, it's a decade. At the very least, it's a new decade. So it's like
Or one would argue it's the end of this current one. Like
39 and then
40 is the final lap. Right? Wouldn't
Yeah,
you
because
say?
I guess, well, I mean, I wouldn't have said it. But we came across this recently when we were doing
Oh, it was like a
how to
trivia.
answer. Are you smarter than a fifth grader? And someone said, what is the date of the?
Not when is the date.
No,
When?
what was the date
Oh,
of
yes.
the beginning of the 20th century?
Yes.
And we said January 1st,
1900.
1900.
And that was wrong.
And it was wrong. But I would have assumed that the beginning of the century was 0. Because if we go back to AD, BC, all that stuff, 0 was a year. And it was the first year of that century or millennia. So I'm like, I would consider 0 a number, even though it doesn't have value in the mathematical.
Sure.
You know what I
Because when
mean?
a baby's born, they don't start off at 1.
Yeah, we say he's 2 months, 3 months, 4 months,
Yeah.
until he makes 12 months, and now we use a different metric. So I would have said 0.
Sure. Okay.
So I would say that this is the beginning of a new decade. So at the very least, I'm thinking about beginning my 4th decade. First, and then secondly, I'm like, I'm here. Like I've made it another decade. Thinking about maybe people who haven't made it this far
Yeah.
or didn't have the, weren't fortunate enough to make it this far. I'm like thinking about that. But the other thing is, as I've thought about this, I was talking to John about this a few days ago, but like the first decade or the first 2 decades of your life, you don't have a ton of autonomy. So you're kind of, and especially the first 10 years of your life, the first decade of your life, you're living under the control of your guardians, whoever they are. So you're having fun, you're enjoying life, but you're still discovering, you're exploring. And then in your teenage years, that teenage decade, you're like still doing a lot of the same with a bit more autonomy, a bit more sense of self. And it isn't until your 20s where you have autonomy, but still unsure of who you are, right? You're like in college or post-college life, but you don't really know who you are. I mean, I'll speak for myself. I don't think I really knew who I was in my 20s. Maybe in my late 20s, I started to get a sense of like, yo, I think I love these things. I want these things to be a real part of my life. These people, I mean, we also met each other really early, right? So we met each other at 19, got married at 23, had a kid at 24, moved away at 23, had some really serious things happen, deaths, loss, transition, early in life. And then, I mean, we don't have to talk about this, but did something really major in starting a church in our mid 20s.
Late 20s, yeah. Like that
mid to late 20, we did something major, right? We became entrepreneurs, initiators, and then leaders of a group of people.
I would say, I'm sorry to interrupt, but like
Now you good.
for a season such as your 20s, where you just said, right, like you don't really know much about yourself because this is like the decade really that you are like your first one that you have a general sense of autonomy.
Yeah.
And like a lot of exploration ideally or tends to happen for people in their 20s.
Yeah.
So for a decade that requires or is like fertile ground for a lot of exploration, we really did a lot of things that required us to be very decided
Yes.
about ourselves.
Yes, that's a really good point.
And so
Yeah, that's a really good point. So I'm hearing you say, like, for being such a season of uncertainty and like exploring and discovery, we took on roles that required the opposite.
correct.
Yeah, okay. I just want to
Correct.
make sure I followed.
Yeah, like we really did a lot that required and that's also not to say like when you enter certain things as like marriage and like having kids and other things that you're supposed to have everything figured out because you're just not going to. But there's a little bit of like a little bit more knowing oneself should occur. So I just feel like for a period such as having room to like make mistakes, try new things, do all those things, we really set ourselves up in such a way that it was like, no, here is what it is now. And like you need need to know who you are.
Those things being marriage,
Being a spouse.
parenting,
Yes, being a parent.
leaders,
Being
community leaders.
Yeah.
Well, why you make that face?
because specifically when it comes to leading a church, there is a huge expectation from others that you need to be very clear and decided about who you are. And what happens is that marriage, you have one person's expectations that you've got to like work,
Which is still a
right?
lot, yeah.
Which is still a lot. A child, you bring them in, and now their expectations. I mean, the kid is just dependent. They don't know what they're expecting or not. But when you have something as like leading a church, there are tens and tens or whatever the amount is of like now there could be conflicting expectations, varying expectations that are all happening simultaneously.
Of one person.
Of one
or
person.
Or of one group of
or
people.
And that's just, again, in a stage and in a time where it's like your first decade of just being your own person and making decisions, it was a lot.
Yeah. And to that, I think it's the reason why I'm like looking at 40 as a huge marker, because I feel like turning 40, it took 40 years for me to meet myself with utmost clarity. Like, I'm stepping into 40 with the greatest sense of myself, who I am, interests, personality, expectations of myself that I've had, that others have had, the ways that other people's expectations have lived with me over the course of my life. And while I don't think all of that is changing at 40, I felt like some of that has begun to change in my mid 30s, which is kind of crazy to say that I felt like I was starting to live with a greater sense of self. Like, I know who I am. I have clarity about who I am. And I began to get there in my early to mid 30s. I feel like going into 40, I'm like super excited about. We've obviously also changed a lot of our circumstance, right? Mm-hmm. We no longer lead the church, so we've removed a swath of people's expectations of us. We moved. I think that plays a role. I'm trying to figure out exactly how, but I know it plays a role that we left the place that had so much expectations of us,
Yeah.
or that had so much influence over us, right? The Northeast. I feel like going into my 40s feels like this feels really good. And while I don't have everything figured out, I feel like I have the most figured out about who I am. And this feels like it will be the first decade of my life where I'm living most free.
Mm-hmm.
Not
Yeah, I
because we're no longer pastors, not because we're not any longer in the Northeast, which was home for us, but because I have a greater sense of clarity of who I am, who God made me to be, and how to relate that version of myself to other people, beginning with you, to the kids, to my friends, to my family. And that's why I feel like, turning 40 kind of feels like a big deal, not because 40, but because of all of those things.
Yeah.
That makes sense?
Yeah. I'm trying to think about, because you said you feel like you're meeting yourself. And I'm trying to think about how I feel about that, because I'm like, I don't know. It's just, maybe it's just the language or the wording.
It might be.
Because I'm like, man, if I'm just meeting myself at 40, that would make me feel like, who was I this entire time? Right? So
Yeah, that might not be the best language. It took 40 years for me to get here. It's probably the better way to say what I'm trying to express.
yeah.
But really, it's like this version of myself that I'm meeting now, I like. So you said something a few days ago about our 20s, all of our 20s, especially the second half of it, and our early 30s. I was trying to recall something in the conversation, and I was having a hard time. Oh, I said, this was in our last conversation. I said, I don't remember a lot of the years of when the kids were young.
Mm-hmm.
I have a lot of beautiful memories,
Mm-hmm.
and memories that are kind of emblazed in my head. But I don't remember how we parented. I don't remember all the details of that. And we laughed about it, but you said it's okay. It was a busy time.
Oh, yeah.
And I wonder, in relationship to this conversation about turning 40 or stepping into this new, because turning 40 also feels like stepping into a new season of life, right? Not necessarily the number, but the
circumstance.
The
I would
circumstance. Yeah, for sure, the circumstance. But I mean, like, not necessarily the number 40, but the energy and the feel around it. We've got older kids. We move. We're in a new season of life. We're getting older.
Yeah.
I want to talk about that season of life, like in relationship to getting older or turning 40. How did being busy in our 20s, our prime years of discovering keenly who we are and how we are to show up in the world, how did that busyness impact you maybe seeing yourself? Like,
Yeah.
we were busy, so I didn't have time to think about my interests. I didn't have time to think about who I was
Yeah.
deeply. Does the question make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. I feel like it stunted my growth. I would say a little bit.
Okay.
Because life quickly just became about my relation to others.
Mm-hmm.
So a good part of it was just, how I existed and related to others, how I
Yeah.
showed up as a wife, and like, was I being a good wife, right? And how I showed up as a mother, right?
Mm-hmm.
And was I just doing this right as I learned how to do it, right?
Yeah.
Like, you're just learning. So like, no, I just got to make sure that this is good, everybody's good, everything is right. And then, yeah, just like starting a church, help leading a church, just making, sure like people, no, that's not the right way to say it. I was going to say making sure people weren't disappointed, but that wasn't it. I think there were times that I felt like that. How can I just go this week without us disappointing somebody?
Yeah, no, that's real.
So what I mean by it stunted my growth was I wasn't thinking about myself. So I wasn't thinking, I had a general sense of who I was. I wasn't going to say I was like oblivious to like who I was as an individual, but it's just,
You didn't do
I didn't do the work, nor did I create space and experiences to give myself the chance to figure it out.
Well, I mean, in your defense, as you mentioned, it was a busy time.
Yeah. So I'm just saying,
yeah.
that's the answer to the question, like what that time did. I also would say, though, while your 20s are like fertile ground for that, it doesn't all happen in your 20s, right?
That's a great point.
That's like, it should go without saying, but I'll say it anyway. Like, that doesn't mean that that's your window. And once you pass it, doesn't mean that it's not it, because you will discover yourself and you will learn new things as you get new things, like as you go through new things, rather. Like, not everyone is raising kids in their 20s, right? Some people start having kids in their 30s. Not everybody has kids, right? Like, or just there are so many variances, right? So I would say that your 20s aren't also the only place and the end all be all for that. Because just the way our lives panned out, we are learning things about ourselves now. We are giving ourselves the permission to change, to evolve, to just grow. And so, I wouldn't even say that we're making up for lost time, because I don't think, even though I shared everything that I shared, I don't think any time was lost, because even now, as I reflect, I can take what those years were, and I mean, that's part of us, that's part of me. So I can just take that coupled with who I am now. Like, in a sense, that shaped me too. Like, those experiences shaped me in many ways. So and no, I think it's actually a really helpful way to frame it, like, there is no window. While the 20s feel like fertile ground for discovery and exploration to happen, that isn't your only window. And I think that's what makes turning 40 exciting, actually. Like, that's right. It's not the only window. Like, I can do some discovering and learning now. And it doesn't feel late. And it doesn't feel like making up for lost time. We are all always changing. And I think initially that thought was like a little terrifying, like that things change. But what's interesting, it wasn't terrifying, like, for me, that I'm gonna change. Like, I think I embraced and welcomed the idea that I would evolve as life happened, right? That I would evolve now that I have kids, that I would evolve now that I have a partner, that I would evolve now that I had this vocational experience, considering what I did as a pastor.
that I would evolve, that I would evolve, that I would evolve. With every life circumstance, I would find a way to evolve. I think I welcome that idea, and it wasn't terrifying. I thought it was terrifying for the people that were closest to me. And I've shared this with you before, that I'll use you as an example, like that you would change, and that in your changing, I would no longer be important to you in the way that I was in your previous version.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
I don't even know why that came to mind right now, but as you were talking about changing, I'm like, oh yeah, that was a terrifying thought. But really for the people that I love, because if they changed, what if they changed into a version of themselves that wasn't any longer interested in me? And I think that kind of lived as a little underlying fear.
Yeah.
I don't know why I thought that.
I mean,
But
I talked about, yeah, just changing and growing.
yeah.
But you would argue, right? Like, or not you would argue, but you would say, right, that you have changed.
Yeah, for sure.
And I'm sure that you glad that you are changing.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
am.
Yeah. So it was that terrifying in that, did you feel that about me? Like, did you ever feel like I don't want to change so much that I outgrow her or something?
No. I don't think I ever thought that. And I think I'd never thought that because you had never communicated that was a fear for you.
What do you mean?
So I never thought that me changing and growing, that you would be afraid of that.
Mm-hmm.
Because you have never communicated uncertainty about my commitment
Mm-hmm.
to you, and you haven't done that either. But I think I have dealt with my own insecurities and fears that I think I projected onto you, my fears. Like, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like, I never thought me changing would make you fearful in the way that you changing made me fearful. Primarily because you've always been so confident about your relationship with me. And you have never communicated, don't change, and if you do, make sure that you stay. You've never communicated that, which tells me, like, yo, she's chilling.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there have been times where I have felt uneasy, not because you have done anything to make me feel uneasy, but because I think I've projected onto you my own insecurities, like projected onto the relationship my own insecurities. And I think that in the scheme of this whole conversation about getting older, I think that has changed for me. You know, like, I feel like I have been more aware of my insecurities and where they come from, and to not label them like, yo, this is Anna's doing. It's like, this is, like, I think I'm projecting onto her
Yeah.
how I feel about something.
I think that that's something I wish we would have been better equipped with at the very start. Like, more so, just more language, just like change philosophy. Just like,
Oh my gosh.
um,
Oh my gosh.
I wish that would have.
In general, like, I wish that.
Yeah.
I
Like,
wish that.
You mean like life?
Yeah,
Yeah.
like in life.
Yeah. In general, I think that the biggest, I think, where it's most prevalent is like your children, because yes, they grow up and they just change and change and change, and they walk and they eat and they grow and blah blah blah. But I feel like I wish that it would have been shared with us, or someone would have like imparted that wisdom, like as we were getting ready to get married, like just an idea of like change philosophy and all that comes with it, right? Like, especially for two people that met very early and got married very early. Like, the idea that naturally people change because circumstances change. You could try your best to like fabricate the most static world, and yet like change is constant. So I just wish that that would have been something that would have just been so such an idea that we would be so willing to embrace. Do you know what I mean? Like how we got to conflict, the idea of like not if but when. The same thing about change, right? Like we welcome it, right? We can't wait, as opposed like in the sense of like, man, I can't wait to see how we change. I can't wait to see how we grow and like the twists and turns we'll take. I wish that it would have almost been like this real, like a bonus treat that comes with it, like the perception, right? Like so that
I like what you're saying there because it really, really, really resonates with me, because it's not just, I wish that we were equipped to talk about how we will change over the course of our lives, but you're essentially highlighting not only the awareness that we will change, but an enthusiasm to the reality that we will change, and having enthusiasm for one another's interest and one another's like life journeys. It changes how you engage in that relationship. You're like, oh, you're enthusiastic about my interests. You're enthusiastic about the ways that I'm changing. I was worried that my changing would cause conflict, but you're actually not only aware of it, but you're enthusiastic about it.
Because we'll hear like in like dramas like, you've changed.
That's really good. You do hear that, and
you
it
know what?
It has a weird negative,
it's like
suspicious tone to
and
it.
I don't even know you anymore.
Yes, that's really good. And this is why I said earlier, I wish this was true of all of life, because especially as it relates to our faith, what's often celebrated is that we don't change or that we remain the same, kind of constant.
Well, we celebrate the one big change.
That's funny.
Right?
Yes.
Like there's the one...
By the one big change, you mean like we're saved.
Conversion and all of that, right?
We're transformed.
We celebrate this monumental Super Bowl change.
That's
and then you're
funny.
unwavering the rest of your life.
That's funny and true. But that's the point.
And any hint of change is like
unfaithful.
They're wavering.
They're wavering.
They're shaky
you need
shakes.
to be. They're shaky shakes. They're shaky shakes. That's funny. That's so good. But this is why I think maybe even the way our faith, the way we were, how do I say this? The way that we were maybe shaped into our faith kind of did a little bit of a disservice to us relationally in some ways, right? And what I mean by that is what you just described. We celebrate this one massive change that Christians call conversion and transformation. But then everything else is unwavering. You kind of remain constant in a world of change.
Mm-hmm.
You remain faithful. And we almost made faithful synonymous to unwavering, right? But then life happens, and you have to learn how to evolve and adapt to the circumstances of your life. While your faith may not change, how you express your faith in the world changes, because your circumstance changed. Now you're a married woman. Before you were single. Now you're an empty nester. Now you're a woman going through loss. Now you're a woman who's leading a church. Circumstances change that require your faith to not change in essence, but to adapt in expression. And I feel like what you're saying resonates so much with me, and that is what makes me excited about going into this new decade.
Yeah.
Like, I'm changing. I have changed. I have changed over the course of my 30s. That's where I felt the most change happening.
Mm-hmm.
And my 40s feel like it's going to mostly be about settling into things that I've discovered about myself.
That's interesting because
You feel the opposite?
I feel like, sure, if we're going to use this mile marker, right?
Yeah.
I feel, if anything, I am entering into a season where I feel like I want to see change.
More change.
And like, in the sense of like, no, I feel like I want to keep changing. I feel like there's stuff,
Yeah.
there's stuff in
I
the...
mean, I'm not mad at that. I still want more things to change.
Yeah, like I want to like, I'm still clearing out the cabinet to kind of like put everything back in.
Like what do you want to see change?
I don't know. I wouldn't be able to tell you right now. And that's the thing too. Like, I think that we may only, I'm going to assume that we're only thinking about big things.
Sure.
Where it could just be like subtle, like little, like things, but that I would notice might be different, right? I don't know. I can't think of anything right now, but they don't necessarily have to be like life-altering, identity shifting things, but they can also just be little things, but still change. So that's what that's what I'm alluding to. Like, no. I think I still feel like there are things that I want to like turn over and like look under and move around, and like I just want to put this thing here. When you think about rearranging, say, this bookcase, right? You could look at change of like, no, we got to take everything off and like rearrange it. Or it's like, no, I think I just want to move like this frame over here. And I don't know, maybe just like this printer right here. Like, that can also be what it is.
Sure.
But I think something else that I feel like that can be hard is there's a difference in relationships when you go through something and you're changing together. But there are some times where there are seasons where someone is like evolving and someone is like going through something and like experiencing growth when the other person maybe necessarily isn't.
Yeah.
So it's like, what do you do also? Like when something like that happens, right? Like I may be just watching, I don't know, you go through like deep learning and exploration and all of those things where I'm like, oh, actually last year there wasn't much happening with me, let's say, right?
Sure.
So like when you talk about rooting for one another and like celebrating change, I think that that's also something to be mindful of in change philosophy, right? Like you may not always
That's
be
really good.
changing at the same time.
What's your philosophy of change?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there may be seasons where someone is just going through something or experiencing something and like got to like tear things down in order to build things up, and the other one is just not, right? So then how do you embrace that? How do you remain how do you remain satisfied while also just celebrating and like being a support system to the other person that changes? I'm telling you, like,
Yeah,
I wish
that's
these were
really
things
good.
that
That's really good.
these were things that I wish 17 years ago we would have known, that it would have just been like imparted along the way.
How are we doing on that?
How are we doing on that?
Yeah, like,
I don't know, you tell me.
honestly.
Or what do you think?
Yeah, I don't know if I've said this in one way or another, but I guess I'll say it now. But I think I feel like I may owe you an apology. As you're talking, I'm like listening to you talk about this. One, not only is it like really profound, but it's also helpful, like practically helpful, and it resonates for those reasons. But I feel like, and I'll need you to respond to this because I need to hear your thoughts about what I'm gonna share. I think I owe you an apology because at some point last year, you were doing some exploring. You know, you were talking about wanting to get into volleyball and some other stuff. I can't quite remember all the things you said, but you were doing your own exploring. You were asking questions about yourself and interests, and man, what do I want to do? And I think it was around the time you were reading Becoming, actually, Michelle's book. And that book, of course, was probably doing a lot of that unearthing. And I remember sitting in the car right in front of the house.
Oh, that was for my birthday.
Was it? Okay, even better. Right, you were turning, 39. And we were sitting in front of the car, in front of the house, in the car, and you were talking about exploring all these things, and I had a moment, and I shared how afraid I was of that. You remember this conversation? Mm-hmm. I shared how afraid I was and how insecure I felt about that, because I wondered if all these new things that you were exploring, if I was going to be left out of them. And I feel like, and by being left out of them, I mean like I was not going to be important for this new thing that you were exploring. This new, why are you laughing?
Because it's, again, the idea that you weren't going to be important. It's silly, but
I know. And I felt really nervous and really afraid. And you're right, it is silly, but I don't know why I felt that, but I communicated it. And I hearing you talk now, I felt like I was being mad selfish. Kind of like making it about what I was afraid of, rather than this thing that you wanted to pursue and be excited about, which I feel like, despite me sharing that, I feel, and this is why I want you to respond and chime in, I feel like I've still always been a cheerleader for you, like wanting you to discover things, and you want to go out for volleyball, go do it, or you want to go run, you want to do this, go do it. I feel like I've still done that. And then as you were doing it, I'm like, wait, don't forget me, kind of thing. So I feel like I owe you an apology. If that sounds right, if that sounds wrong, then, I want to hear your thoughts. But if it sounds right, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to make that moment or those moments about me and what I was afraid of, whereas I should have been just enthusiastic that you were trying to explore more about yourself. And I think the reason why I was hesitant to say it this way is because I still feel like I'm a cheerleader for the things that you have tried to do, and enthusiastic about them, but maybe that moment felt like it took away from the enthusiasm.
Yeah, I do remember that conversation. And yeah, I walked away from that feeling like that a little bit. And I agree with you. This is not to say that you haven't been supportive of me doing things for myself or like wanting to try new things. But I think in that moment, it just felt like, okay, sure, but like not too much. I think maybe I just felt a little bit like, just rein it in a little bit. Like, don't be going like, no, 0 to 100 and tearing down this whole bookshelf or whatever, right?
Sure.
So, yeah, I don't think you're wrong. But so I appreciate you mentioning that. I do.
Well, honestly, everything that you shared about being enthusiastic about change, like this change philosophy, we've talked about this throughout the course of the last several years, I think, in one way or another, whether it was me saying this about faith, like, yo, why don't we have a theology of evolution? You remember when I shared this with you a few years, not a few years, it's been maybe like 2018, 2017 at this point. But I'm like, yo, we really don't have a theology of evolution, like how people change and how that's going to make faith look sloppy.
Yeah.
Because we're trying to like step into this suit of, Jesus-like generosity and Jesus-like love and Jesus-like mercy and Jesus-like forgiveness. But I can't be like Jesus, right, this quickly.
Mm-hmm.
That being like Jesus is a lifelong journey. Anyways, this idea of a theology of evolution, like you saying a change of a philosophy of change, I'm like, that's actually really, really practical and really helpful to our relationships. And to some degree, I think it's what makes me like eager and curious about this new decade of life. Now that we have, or let me ask, what do you feel like most, like what are some of the things that you feel like you've learned going back all the way back to how we started this, which was you talking about this survey that you've been a part of, like, wow, you don't have access to those
The data.
that data, but your life has changed
Mm-hmm.
quite a bit since 13. You know what I mean? How are you going into 40, like knowing about Anna? Like what do you know about Anna that you're like, yo, I'm kind of eager about this thing that I've learned or am learning about myself, and I'm eager to leave this thing about Anna in the last decade.
Yeah. I'm going into it more curious. So even when we talk about love, we've had conversations and we've said this at one point or another, just like love inspiring curiosity,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like love should cause us to be curious.
That's right.
Right? The moment that you stop being curious about someone or anything, right, is like love is
At risk.
in the background, at
Mhm.
risk, right? And so I am going into this like with a lot of curiosity, and I think I want to hold myself accountable to that, where like if I take anything from these surveys, right, these people, they track you down. Like it doesn't, like you cannot do it anymore in a sense either, right? So like they will find you wherever you are. You could be in prison and they go visit you.
That's like real.
Yeah, you could be
Yeah.
in prison and they visit you and you do your interview there. Like, so these people go at lengths to find me and sit with me. And it's all about me, right?
That's really good.
And I am going into, this next year and the years after that. Like, I want to just continue,
That's
but I
really good.
really want to be more curious about myself, ask myself more questions, and just like shift that, as opposed to what do you want to do or what do you this, and like making it about others. I really want to be accountable to myself and be more curious about myself. And so I want, because something, I may not have the data, but if I were to like think about the responses that I've done, that I've had along the way, and if I think about my life, like I have invested time and energy, like I am unwavering in what I invest my time and energy in. Like if I'm going to choose to spend my time and energy with these people, like I'm going to spend it, right? Like my family, I'm going to dedicate my time and my resources to the things that I like really love. And I guess that's kind of like, well, duh. But I think about the things that I'm very steadfast in, and I can be very steadfast. So I just want to be more curious about myself. So that's what I'm taking. Just being more curious. And what I'm leaving behind, I mean, I don't know. Just like the opposite of that, like the people pleasing.
Prioritizing other people's opinions or, expectations or perceptions maybe of you or.
Yeah, or even feelings. Like, and not to say that I don't care, like, and that's the part where sometimes it's just like such a polarized thought, but like yeah, just try this is not something I can necessarily leave behind, but maybe just trying more to like not be so swayed or influenced. Yeah, by people's perceptions, but also people's feelings, I think. Yeah. You?
I really like what you said. Even the metaphor of they will find you. Like the metaphor of they will find you. That's how interested they are in what you have to say. I'm like,
It's really not that, but
well, they're interested in the data
yeah.
because they're going to use that data to, they're going to analyze that data and draw conclusions about labor and how we change over the course of our lifetimes. I'm like, I want to be that interested in myself.
Right.
I want to be that curious about how I have changed. So I really like what you said. So in a way, similar to you, like I said to a friend a few days ago, like since moving here to Atlanta 3 years ago, I've met a lot of new people. I've been able to really invest into old relationships that, because of distance, I didn't have the space or time to do. But the person that I've been most interested to meet in these last 3 years has been myself. And I think I want to do more of that going into my 40s. I'm also going into my 40s really, and I don't mean this in a kind of like selfish way, but going into my 40s really squeezing the juice out of friendships. Like really getting the most out of the people that see me for who I am and love me, no less. And and those friends that inspire me and challenge me. I think I and by friends I mean friends and family, like the people that I consider family, really.
Yeah.
Going into my 40s, like really wanting to squeeze the juice out of that, and let that be my drink, the thing that refreshes me. Friends. I just, I think that's the extrovert in me. Like I find so much energy being around people that I love. Laughing, eating, drinking, talking, and I really like that. And that includes Josiah and Hayden, because we talked in our last conversation about how with Josiah in particular, we're like really the knobs of parent and friend, like we're really turning up the knob on friend because he's getting older. And so I think that also includes Josiah, like wanting to really get the juice out of that relationship, as well as Hayden. I feel like I also have a lot to say and a lot to create. Like I just have a lot to express and share with the world. you know, whether it's through the creative arts or, you know, through what I think is my gift of communication. Like I want to be excited about doing that more.
Yeah.
What I'm leaving behind, similar to you too, you know, like I think for a long time I lived with the burden of people pleasing. You know, calculating every room I walked into, thinking about what they needed me to be in order to ensure connection with that person. And I gave it to them because I thought that that was going to secure it. And it was often at the betrayal of myself,
Mm-hmm.
you know, not doing that, leaving that in the last decade. Although I think the last several years I've begun to leave that behind. It was part of this decade, so like leaving it in this decade. And I also think I want to leave behind in this decade allowing external things to dictate my pace. Like I don't want anything external to dictate the pace I move with.
Okay.
Be it work. I'm aware of like the privilege that can come with a statement like that, but I'm saying it even at the expense of privilege. Like I don't want to compromise moving at the pace that I feel like my body needs, that my mind needs, that my emotions need. Like I want to move at the pace that those things need, even if it means I don't make money here or I don't make money there. I lose a certain privilege here, privilege there. Because I feel like I've learned over the last few years that the greatest form of wealth is like a healthy sense of self, and healthy relationships. And I don't want anything external to dictate the pace of my life that puts those things at risk. Yeah.
That's good. Should write it down so it's visible. You don't forget it around like
What,
June.
these things?
yeah.
Well, we got it on wax, as they say.
Yeah.
I'm excited to turn 40.
Good.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to it. I also don't think 40 is old. Like I also don't have that perception of that number.
Yeah. It's good.
I think about my dad or my parents at our age. My dad wasn't playing basketball every week.
Yeah.
You know, my dad was not physically moving. And there are obvious differences, I think, between our parents' generation, what they needed to do and what we get to do because of them. But it's just funny thinking about my dad at my age. Actually, Brian was 1. He had just had my younger brother.
Mm-hmm. Wow, it's crazy.
And I think about that picture. I think you know that picture. He's like
Hanging over the crib.
hanging over the
Mhm.
crib. That's me at, you know, at my age. That's him at my age.
Yeah. Times have changed.
Yeah, times have changed.
Yeah. It's different. Different eras.
Funny, he did have this mustache in that picture. Like he had the dark mustache, no beard.
Yeah.
I mean, my beard growing in already, but
Look at that.
yeah, I'm happy to turn 40. I'm excited.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday to you.
Are we good? Are we done?
Yeah, we're done. Thank you.
It's good. You want to turn this off?
Yeah.
Thanks for watching. We hope that you enjoyed sharing this time with us. Conversations like these are meant to inspire conversations of your own with the people that you love. So until the next one, remember to do all that you can to remain curious about your own journey. You might be surprised to see who's been there all along. Take care.